So let's get down to business because that's why all these wonderful people
Yeah,
are here.
because we're definitely in business mode now.
Okay, so explain who you are to those of you who might not know who you are.
Wow, I don't even know how to start with that. Just some dude who runs some organization called the 10th Amendment Center, and we are have been around since mid 2006. So I guess when people say, "Oh, that all the Tea parties that have been around forever, we predated that by a good 3 years." Well, I guess it depends which Tea Party. If you're talking Ron Paul versus the mainstream ones, and yeah, we just believe in rejecting federal power on almost every single situation and leaving decisions close to home in states, or better yet, closer to the individual itself.
And what made you start this whole thing? What made you start the 10th Amendment Center?
Wow. Well, I mean, it was a long process. I started many years ago. Originally, for me personally, I grew up a communist, very hard to the left, and I don't know if that was more just kind of a backlash against for whatever reason, I never liked the system. I hated it all. I was a big fan of Michael Moore years ago as I was growing up. And then I became a very strong anti-war activist, starting protesting the day that the Iraq War started here in Los Angeles, getting pushed around by cops and run over, and just involved in helping organize a lot of the large anti-war protests. But as I kind of learned and grew in my political understanding, started reading books, learning more Rothbard, I read a lot of Harry Brown, things like that, then I started recognizing as I was involved in these anti-war groups, like, instead of just being opposed to the violence and the aggression, I was noticing they were saying, well, instead of spending the money on bombing people, let's spend it on this social service or this. And I just started learning over the years that all these government programs were failures. And on top of it, as I learned some constitutional things, they weren't even authorized to do them, supposedly, as if, they're ever going to follow their own rules. And I saw the 10th Amendment as kind of a line in the sand that average people could understand. That, yeah, most people believe that if there's going to be rules, they should be followed, and these are the rules for government, and that means, well, most everything they do, they shouldn't be doing. So I thought it was kind of a good idea to I'll just start talking about stuff and pointing things out and hoping that maybe it'll go somewhere. And now today we have an organization that gets, just this year we were hammered on by two former Bush administration officials in the Washington Post. The Wall Street Journal editorial board referred to us as fear mongers because we were opposing indefinite detention powers. So I think it's worked out pretty well so far.
When stuff like that happens, you're doing the right thing. So, do you ever couple the Ninth Amendment in with your 10th Amendment Center in any way? Do you tandem the two?
Okay, well, they were written to be in tandem. They are the federalism amendments that basically the Ninth Amendment says that just because the Bill of Rights talks about all these particular things that the feds aren't supposed to get involved in, peacefully assemble, free press, religion, all those things, doesn't mean that this is an exhaustive list. And coupled with the 10th Amendment, the people are going to determine how they're going to deal with all the most important issues close to home. Because when you have a one-size-fits-all solution like we actually do today, almost every time half the country is screwed, or in my view, everybody's screwed all the time. When you have a mistake made, which is constantly, then you don't have an escape route. If you would think of it this way, let's say Stalin only ruled over Moscow, or Mao only over, I don't know, Shanghai, and George Bush had Texas, and Obama maybe had Chicago, the world would be a far different place because they wouldn't have had the resources to be able to expand their power the way they do by running an entire massive nation. So again, the bottom line is really decentralization. The goal is individual liberty. So the closer you get the decision making towards the individual, the better we are.
So I know you've had a lot of success with Obamacare, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, Obama's had a lot of success with it, but We've had a lot of success generating attention to the ideas of resisting it. We talk about nullification. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but I mean, I don't see a lot of success. I do know that what it's doing is it's such a bad law economically, and the idea that government can somehow coerce you through a tax to do a particular thing. Oh, well, we don't necessarily want you to have a gun, but we can't prevent you. But if you have one, we're going to have a gun owner's tax. That idea has, broad reaching ramifications. So I think a lot of people are starting to think beyond like, wow, these things are pretty bad to holy crap. Now what do we do?
How effective do you feel that nullification can be in states like New York?
Okay, so first to explain one of the things so first of all, the 10th Amendment basically in, layman's terms says that the federal government's authorized to do a certain amount of stuff and everything else is left to the people of the states as the people of each state determine. In the Constitution itself, some people will tell you there's 17 or 18 things that the feds can do, but if you count out the entire document, there's about 30 things that the feds can do. That's it, that they're authorized to do. And everything else should be determined by the states. So the idea of nullification, this comes back from Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and other founding fathers. It's the view that when the federal government does stuff that they're not supposed to do, for example, mandate health insurance or gun laws or environmental regulations, whatever, various different things, ban a plant, for example. When they are passing laws that they're not supposed to, they're not authorized to do, it's the duty of the people of each state to stand up and basically reject that by any means necessary. Sometimes it's refusing compliance, sometimes it's dragging their feet, not taking part in particular programs, not helping out the federal government, and other times it's putting up actual barriers to block the feds from enforcing it. And I think it can be very effective. The reason is, in my view, in modern times, the only thing that has actually been effective in rejecting federal power has been state-level responses to the feds. If we think of all the people who protested war under the Bush administration and got the peace president bombing the hell out of people around the world and increasing arms sales and the drone strikes, the same, people also oppose the Patriot Act and Guantanamo and all these different things. And we get the same type of programs no matter what political party or what individual is in power in Washington, D.C. But in recent times we've seen, or in modern times, we've seen that people can be effective. And I always talk about the thing that I think has been the most effective example, the blueprint, basically, and that's weed. My home state here in California was the first state to actually start defying Washington, D.C. back in 1996. And the feds, at the time, everybody was like, oh, my God, these people in California are insane. They're never going to get away with it. Well, we're not fully getting away with it here. But you know what? There are 17 states and possibly more. I know New York has been considering a medical marijuana bill, even though Cuomo thinks it's evil to be able to, for cancer patients to be able to, relieve themselves. I mean, that's what thugs do. But we can recognize that when enough people say no to these laws or rules or mandates, and then following that, enough states actually pass laws backing the people up. So it starts from the people, and then sometimes the states will follow and get on board. Then it becomes extremely difficult for the feds to actually force their mandates and laws and rules and bans down our throats. That's the short version.
So, if you think about it outside the box, someone had a really great question, which I'm going to ask you in a second, but if you think of it kind of outside the box, it's almost like the states would each be seceding in a way from the federal government if they denounced all of those sort of rules, in the sense that I know it's constitutional, there's constitutional basis for it, but the government really doesn't follow the Constitution anymore. So that's where my whole question lies. If they're willing to defy the Constitution so readily on a national level, what's to say that they won't, kind of take action on a state level if states start to defy federal mandate?
Okay, well, first of all, states have been doing this for some time now. First of all, we're talking about the weed situation. I know there's a lot of things in the news talking about how Obama's been cracking down on marijuana. Well, I'd love to welcome you to California, where you can walk down the street and every other business, it seems like, here in Los Angeles is a marijuana business or a related business that sells glassware, things like this that all been illegal. I talked with the people over at Normal. This is a national organization for reform of marijuana laws pretty regularly, and I can't remember the exact statistic, but I believe here in California there's approximately 10,000 businesses that are directly involved in the marijuana industry. Now, the feds have recently shut down, I think, maybe a few hundred businesses over the past year. So if you look at the percentage, I mean, I know CNN will say, dun, 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 the marijuana industry is crumbling. But if you look at 9,500 businesses actively defying Congress, the Supreme Court, the executive branch, and getting away with it because the feds don't have the manpower, we recognize that, they may huff and puff, no pun intended, but when enough people say no, it's very, very difficult to stop them. We also see red states like Arizona just recently started implementing a marijuana program. In Arkansas, they just qualified for a ballot initiative this November by thousands of signatures beyond the minimum. It's actually polling in favor by a few points that even a state like Arkansas may pass medical marijuana. I feel personally, and this is more of a gut instinct, I feel that the feds have been upping the intensity because they realize that it's spiraling out of control. And if, 5, 10 more states, if New Hampshire does it, or Massachusetts, I know, has a vote, Colorado is voting on full legalization. I know there in New York it's been considered and always gets rejected by the thugs. Oregon is talking about full legalization. Even Kentucky is looking at it. A few more of these states get on board. You got half the country saying no to D.C., and game over for these guys. And not just weed, though, but there was also another bill that the Bush administration gave us back in 2005. It was called the Real ID Act. This was a national ID card. A lot of people thought it had privacy implications. Other people said, you know what, you're not supposed to be involved in ID cards anyways. And states like Maine, New Hampshire, and a few others in the Northeast started passing these laws and resolutions a few years back saying, hey, we're just not going to comply with it. Well, here we are a few years later. That law was supposed to be implemented in 2008. Here it is 4 years later. Over half the country has formally rejected the act, and there's been no tanks rolling into Utah forcing people to get national ID cards. There's no jackbooted thugs coming into Missouri doing the same. It's been very peaceful. The federal government, the states rejected it, say no, and the federal government basically gets overwhelmed. They know that there's no way for us to enforce it without people complying. It's the whole idea of if a tree falls in a forest, does anybody hear it? That's a whole philosophical thing. But if Congress passes a law and no one follows it, it really is no law at all.
Hi, Gigi.
Hi, Gigi.
Hi. I'm just listening because you're so damn smart, Michael. I learned so much from you.
I'm sorry, I just ramble. This is fun.
No, it's good. It's good.
They actually do have, I believe, legislation right now coming up in New York. Governor Cuomo actually said that he was going to relax on the enforcement of the marijuana laws, yes, especially in New York City, and he stood by that as far as what I've seen so far. So, for a liberal state, we sure don't have the liberal drug law.
No, and it's funny. I always kind of give my East Coast friends, and my sister and my brother-in-law live in Boston as well. They're very hardcore liberals. I always give them a hard time. I'm like, you East Coast people, you're like archaic. I mean, you can't even grow a plant in your backyard without the locals and the feds coming in to bust you down. So it's pretty gross, actually. Cuomo is, I think it's a sham. What he's talking about, so there was a bill in the Senate. I can't remember the bill number, but there's a bill that was introduced in the Senate. I believe it passed the House by a wide number again, and it was for a full-on, just a regular old medical marijuana bill, limited accessibility, but still a good first step. Now, Cuomo was totally opposed to this because, this liberal loser can't let people do what they want to do in their own backyards. So he started getting in favor of a kind of a softer decriminalization. We're not going to punish people as much at the same time, because I think he's recognizing that if he didn't take some kind of stand on weed, there'd be kind of a big backlash. I can't imagine any good self-loving progressive saying, yeah, we need to start punishing people who are smoking a plant or eating a candy bar or whatever with weed in it for a tumor, a cancerous tumor in their brain. But then again, they don't mind Obama killing people in Libya.
Yeah. You touch on so many things in one short sentence, which is wonderful.
I don't like violence. I'm not a fan. So when we're talking about these types of principles, and I think it's just so all-encompassing. In every action, you can see where the violence is coming from. So a ban on a plant is saying, you know what, you, sick person. And the reason I think about the sick person with the cancer patient is because here in California, there was a lady named Angel Rach who she had a tumor like the size of a tennis ball in her head, and her doctor here in California prescribed her weed. And the DEA didn't like that, so they came to her house where she was growing her own plants and stomped them out. If you can picture this, it's almost like a South Park episode where they're going to be like, "Oh, sick lady, you can hardly move. We're going to come in here and stomp out your plants." And I think they did that as a scare tactic. It ended up was pretty high profile, and Angel actually sued. It went to the Supreme Court. And she lost. So basically, the Supreme Court said that, if you have a state law that says you can use marijuana for medicinal purposes, the federal government doesn't have to abide by it. And the lesson that I like to explain is this. At the time that particular ruling came down, there were 10 states that had medical marijuana laws, and since then, not a single one has been repealed. So that says, if we follow the weed method, that when the federal government passes a law, we disobey it, and when the Supreme Court has a ruling, we ignore it, we can be very successful.
I think that's the thing that people have to start to understand too, because as I spoke with you last week, I was trying to find some other way, because it's obvious that our way that we were playing under was not going to work and didn't work. And it's up to the people, I think, also to have the courage to actually do these things, to ignore these laws, to live free. It takes a lot of courage, especially in the climate we live in. We're not in New Hampshire, we're in New York, or we're in, Texas, and some laws are stricter than others. So it takes a lot of courage.
LA. It's as bad as New York is. I guess not. Maybe it's not, because I think there is a very totalitarian mindset there of the times that I've visited. So maybe it is more difficult there.
We just had our police force sent over to Israel to work over there. So the NYPD is now working in Israel.
Well, that's actually great. Congratulations. They should send the rest of them. You'll be a lot safer.
It's really scary. The soda ban and all that kind of thing, and you can't smoke in a park. And it's like you're living, if you go into New York City, it's like you're living in communist Russia. You can't do anything.
Well, it does take courage, and I know that in the early days of the marijuana movement here in California, obviously marijuana was smoked well before the people of California passed the law, but after that 1996 law, I remember seeing on local news when maybe one or two dispensaries open up. Mind you, there's thousands of them now. So at the time, there'd be one or two, and the DEA would come in. They'd get the local sheriff to help them, which is even more disgusting. And they'd come in, and there'd be I know in New Hampshire they have this hotline called Port 411, where they send out messages, and people show up and try to help someone who's being oppressed by the authorities. And so somehow, and I don't know how they actually did this, but I would see on the news there'd be people doing a human barricade around a dispensary saying, don't touch our medicine. And people got their heads busted in. People lost their businesses. I'm sure somebody had to have lost their life in this because of the prohibition causing the cartels to have so much power. But people risk things for freedom. Now, not everybody thinks that weed is the most important thing in the world. I'm very passionate about it because I believe it provides us a great example, because we've seen how local activism and state-level activism and defiance to laws in the face of overwhelming force still works. So when I speak at a gun rally, I'll mention the same thing. They say, I was invited to speak at a gun policy conference a while ago, and they said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about weed. And then I ended it by asking the gun owners, hey, look what the pot smokers are doing. Do you have that same kind of courage? We all do have to have courage, because liberty isn't about pushing a button, pulling a lever, donating to some candidate, waving a sign. It's about acting free whether they want us to or not. And that's my really strongest belief.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it is a scary thing being brought up in this, but if we don't do it, there's not going to be an example for anyone else to do it, and it'll never happen. What are some of the things that you guys are working on now at the 10th Amendment Center? Is there anything big looming on the horizon, or anything you want to talk about?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, obviously, we're always working on supporting the medical marijuana efforts, but I've shared plenty of information on that. Anybody who wants to see all the things that we're working on, obviously, the website's 10thamendmentcenter.com. Other things that we're really focusing heavily on are Obamacare. This is a hot-button issue. We think it's a major attack on individual liberties, and so we're working. And we expect to see, there's already 2 states that are introducing. In New Jersey, they already have a bill pending, and Oklahoma, we expect to see one introduced shortly or in the next session. Probably 10 to 12 states at least will be introducing a bill that doesn't just say that mandates are banned in the state, but the entire Obamacare bill are illegal, null, void. Some of them will include penalties, so criminal charges for federal agents, IRS agents, for example, trying to enforce the Obamacare Act. That's a big one. Another one that we've been kind of out in the forefront, and why both the Wall Street Journal and the Bush people at the Washington Post attacked us, is the NDAA, indefinite detention. We work very, very hard on building coalitions. We work very closely with the ACLU. A lot of people say, whoa, how are 10thers and ACLU together? But we can certainly put aside differences on various issues to recognize that we can work together on the idea that if government can basically arrest you without due process, that's not indefinite detention. What it really is kidnapping. It's government sanctioned kidnapping. So we've pushed very hard on this. We've already had one state pass a law, the first NDAA nullification bill passed in Virginia, where the state is going to refuse compliance on every request to assist the feds. The feds can never carry out these types of things without local logistic support, without sheriffs shutting down roads, without information sharing. So the state of Virginia is going to basically be a nice roadblock, hopefully, if they follow through on that. Michigan is the next state that we're working on. I believe there's some hearings coming up in mid-September on that state also passing a similar piece of legislation, and we expect to see a number of others, Arizona and others, in the 2013 legislative session. But that's an extremely important issue as well.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Do you have about 5 more minutes? I have 2 more questions for you. I don't want to keep you too long.
No, that's cool.
I could keep you for another half hour, but I won't do that to you either.
And a cannoli.
I have another cannoli video if you'd like. I queued a few of them up for you.
That will eat into our time.
What if, I know that your website has a list of chapters. What does it take to get this sort of a foundation in place in your state if it's not there already? What do people need to do to get the 10th Amendment Center sort of galvanized in their state with the resources they need to do what they need to do to move this forward?
Well, I think there's 2 ways to go about doing it. Some people want to be directly affiliated with our organization. They feel like they want to, the people that they associate with or work with on the grassroots, they think the 10th Amendment Center has a powerful impact on them. And so we welcome them to say, you know what, if you want to start a chapter, we have a pretty rigorous application process to make sure people are educated on the principles that we espouse. Otherwise, we just encourage, there's all kinds of grassroots groups around the country who are saying, well, what we should we do? We just hope that they'll take our information and start taking action steps to try to nullify, rather than spending their time on the waste, the cesspool of Washington, D.C. Going to Washington, D.C. to get problems fixed that are created by Washington, D.C. is not just a dumb idea. It never has ever worked. Washington, D.C. never repeals their own power. So we just hope that more and more groups that are independent, already doing things, start focusing their energy closer to home, closer to the individual, whether it's in a state or it's in a city. I know in New York City there's the Liberty Preservation Act, an NDAA bill for the city council that's going to be presented if it has not already been done. So that's something that you could do there in New York City, start working and activating and start doing things in support of that. We have an 18-page PDF, a resource kit on how to actually do grassroots activism locally and get some of these things passed. It was drafted specifically for Obamacare, but it can apply to any particular thing. And if you want to check that out, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/nullify Obamacare, 10thamendmentcenter.com/nullify Obamacare. And it gives you a lot of great, I mean, a lot of the stuff is very common sense, but it's basically, it gives different tracks, different methods on how to do outreach, build coalitions, reach across the political spectrum, because it's important to go beyond. So liberty activists should spend, I believe personally, far less time working with other liberty activists and more time trying to find single issues that they can connect with other groups that may disagree with them to build trust. So then those groups will start listening to a little bit more on other issues. So recently our organization has been building a coalition here in Los Angeles to reject NDAA at the city council level. We've been working with the radical communists of Los Angeles. We're working with CARE. We're working with ACLU. We're working with a number of groups, plus Oath Keepers, Republican Liberty Caucus. So we're building this wide coalition. And because these people who would normally not sit together in the same room, we've been getting together and having meetings together. We're now becoming friends and learning that, you know what, on this issue, we certainly agree. Maybe there's another issue that we agree on. And I think this is how we can build bridges, and people can start learning that it isn't about one side of the political spectrum or the other. It's about us versus them. And I think that's really the key in the long run.
That's so important and so awesome. I mean, that's key right there. Just like the blue Republican movement, so to speak, totally. For Ron Paul. It's almost the same thing, but magnified times 100,000. I mean, you're dealing with communists. And you're getting things that come.
So I speak their language, and I actually am far more. Well, there's this great Rothbard. Do you guys read Murray Rothbard at all, or is that kind of?
Yes, people down here, of course, do. Yes.
Okay, so there's this great Rothbard essay, and I think it's called "Left and Right Prospects for the Future," something like that. And in this, Rothbard, at least this is how I read it, he was basically saying, if you believe in real liberty, oftentimes you're going to have a far better connection with people on the modern left than you will on the right. The reason is, and I tend to agree with this, when I talk to lefties, a lot of them say, well, they want higher wages for people. They want more equality. They want, better jobs. They want people to be able to do more stuff. They want all these nice things. They want more peace, but they just think that it's the method. They think that government can make this happen, and we who believe in liberty know that government prevents it from happening. So our goals are more mutual. It's just that the method. So on the right, I often find that the goals are not mutual. They want to, I don't know. I'm sure we could have examples on both sides, but this has been my personal experience, and I thought Rothbard really touched me on that particular essay.
I haven't read that one, but yeah, I mean, I totally see what you're saying, and the fact that we can take this across, this just breaks the party paradigm into splinters and into a million different pieces, which is what we need to do as a nation, I believe, at this point in time. And they
freak out when this kind of stuff happens. When every time I get an interview like with like New York Times or CNN or Fox or any of these people, it's almost always a very progressive. If I talk to Salon.com, especially the Times, they'll start talking to me and be like, "Oh yeah, this Tenther stuff. So you hate Obama and Obamacare?" And I'm like, "Actually, when I start talking about weed," and they're like, "Wait a second, what is this?" They can't even understand. And you guys get that already, because. And to me, and I've heard it called, Tom Woods always calls it the Scott Horton rule. Scott Horton, who is formerly with Anti-War Radio and now doing his own show, people who believe in liberty can out-left the left and outright the right on every single issue. So if you're a right-winger on gun rights, well, they're fine with having permits. Well, someone who believes in liberty feels that you don't need to have permission from anybody. And so they're going to say, wow, you are tough on gun rights. I love this guy. But people on the left, they say, we like peace. Well, obviously that's an issue that the left hasn't followed through on. But in the grassroots, you'll still find a lot of people who have Obama stickers with peace signs. And this is some kind of weird, sick joke. But if you believe in liberty, obviously you can preach a message of peace far easier than what Democrats do.
Two more things. One thing is, I'm sorry, I don't want to. You're so entertaining. I love talking to you. My goodness.
I move around a lot.
Hey, geez. Two things. One of which is, when you're trying to do this, when you're trying to do it outside of activism and actually try and get these bills introduced, do you need someone on your, 10th or team to sort of be able to draft this stuff, or do you team up with the congressperson or congressman and then figure it out? I mean, how does it work?
Okay, well, you can do it various ways. A lot of times, legislators tend to be lazy. They don't like sticking their neck out unless a lot of people pressure them. We have model legislation drafted. If you're on 10thamendmentcenter.com, near the top right, there's a link that says model legislation on various issues. There's one on Obamacare, for example. There's one on NDAA called the Liberty Preservation Act. There's one on sound money, basically saying that gold and silver can be used as legal tender in your state. There's one called the Hemp Freedom Act, which basically says that a state will defy the federal government and start growing industrial hemp without permission. There's gun rights bill. I mean, so we have model legislation that people have used around the country over the last 4, 5, 6 years, and they just introduce it sometimes verbatim. So the Healthcare Nullification Act that was introduced by Allison Little McHose in New Jersey is almost verbatim our model legislation. It can be introduced. Each state or each locality has their own drafting requirements. At very least, it can give people ideas. So if you want to deal with indefinite detention, our Liberty Preservation Act, there's actually 5 different versions. So it can be, different levels, how tough you want to be, whether it wants to be on the local level, the state level. So we've got all kinds of language that can be done. And mind you, nullifying and freedom while we focus heavily on this type of legislation, we recognize that it really gets down to the individual. When I talk about the weed example, it really does start with individuals choosing that they want to live free on that issue that's important to them. So it was all the people who started smoking pot without permission, and then eventually the state, and I'm not just talking about the state of California, I mean state in general as government, decides to, well, we better catch on and get on board with this because so many people are doing it. So there are different paths. You can do a referendum, you could get legislation, or you can do just flat out non-compliance and resistance. And that fits for various people who want to be political, people who are pure anarchists, people who are kind of middle of the road. It's good stuff.
Do you have, a team of people like that would help to guide groups if they start? I mean, what I'm trying to do here is plant the seeds for all my friends here in the room, because a lot of them are real excited about this. So I'm trying to plant the seeds of the tree of liberty for them a little bit here and get some info for how they start.
We have a team of 60 some odd people that work with us, mostly volunteers. We have small paid staff, mostly part-time, but people that are very available. So if you or any of your friends or people there, wherever they are, want to work on something, or just like, I don't know where to start, I would say, again, first look at our toolkit, 10thamendmentcenter.com/nullify Obamacare. If you read through it, I mean, maybe it's boring to okay, I'm going to read through these ideas of how to get bills introduced. Some of it's very dry, but as you go through it, you're going to find some really good stuff in there, give you great ideas on how to get going. And then every question that comes up, that's why we feel that it's great that groups that are already active just want to start doing stuff. We want to be the resource that can provide answers to questions on everything. So yeah, just reach out to us. A lot of people will post questions on our Facebook page, facebook.com/10th Amendment Center. We'll go in and answer them when we can. We also have an online forum on our website, or for you guys, you'll just reach out to me directly, and if I can't help you with something, I'll get you in touch with someone on our team who can.
And you also do a podcast every day, and
Every day, I would be dead.
It's often.
Once a week, Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern. We're carried on Natural News Radio. We're also on LRN.FM in their podcast loop, or radio.10thamendmentcenter.com. And it's more of kind of a light look at, sometimes we get a little serious too, but we talk about issues of the day, things that are happening. We have guests and legislators and activists. We recently had an interview with these people who organized an event called the Lemonade Freedom Day in Washington, D.C. It's a group of people who believe that you can, either drink raw milk or drink lemonade without having to ask permission from government. We thought it was awesome that they all went and defied laws in D.C. right in front of people.
And you wrote that letter that really just got me. Like, we're waiting for you. Come home. And I was like, I'm home. Here I am. I'm home. I feel so bad that I've ignored you for so long. Please hug me and embrace me and take me. Because it just clicked. I was like, whoa, hey, why didn't I focus more on this before? Why did I let myself get sidetracked? and here I am. So,
Well, I
Michael,
think we've all gone through either government school or government approved textbooks in private school. And, I grew up a communist. I was taught basically, or I felt instinctually, that every solution had a government problem. And a lot of the solutions that we're talking about here, some of them are local government kind of, not necessarily solutions, but kind of being a barrier, a roadblock, or a bludgeon against the feds. Others are individual action, so it works on either path. But what I do know, again, I can't say it enough, the federal government will never fix itself. And even if there was a perfect candidate, and I said this when I spoke at Liberty Forum in New Hampshire this year, even if there was some perfect candidate who won, we still haven't solved the problem of how to deal with the next guy who won't be a perfect candidate. And I believe that nullification, all encompassing, whether it's state nullification, city nullification, sheriff nullification, or individual nullification, I believe this is really the path to actually be able to solve some problems. We have recent history on our side that shows that it can work, and I feel that the more that it happens, the more we will see it work. We've had very supportive response from people like Lou Rockwell, who's run many of my personal articles, also in an interview. Chuck Norris gave us a shout out a couple of years ago. Ron Paul talks very highly about nullification, not necessarily 10th Amendment Center. Judge Napolitano, Tom Woods obviously wrote a book on it. So all these great thinkers, I wouldn't necessarily include Chuck Norris in the great thinkers, but these other great thinkers in this movement for freedom, for liberty, none of them are rejecting the idea of nullification. I don't know if any of them, maybe other than Tom, are saying this is kind of a primary thing to do. But I know that we have a video up on our YouTube channel of Ron Paul talking about, this is one of the primary things that we need to focus on is nullification. And if the states don't start trying to stop some of these things, we're in a lot of trouble. So I think there's a lot of people that are behind this movement, and that's why I expect to see it continue to grow.
I was just actually talking last night with Jordan Page and Adam Kokesh and Tom Woods, and all of us were talking about nullification and you and what you've done. So, it's amazing. And, I know you've got a whole team. Don't blush. It's okay. Have another cannoli. Hold on one second.
Who started that conversation?
Jordan, well, I did actually, and then Jordan was on board, and then we talked about it for a good long while. And Gigi's also actually showing movies and getting people that we've never at the library.
Cool.
What in the world are they spraying, right? Or who in the world? What in the world are they spraying? And last night they show what was the name of it again last night, Gigi?
Generation RX. Generation RX.
So,
cool.
And we're she's meeting people that were never a part of the liberty movement that are on that side of things. And when you were talking about that, the synergy is there. They don't want to be involved in politics per se, but they're really, really, really focused on these core issues and the things like chemtrail. So that's a perfect way to, bridge that gap together. You'll be
something that's important to them. And we're on Natural News Radio, so there's a real synergy between our work and specifically on food freedom issues. There's a lot of people who hate the FDA and the regulations and the rules and the people that it's harmed and killed over the years. And we've connected with many people in the food freedom movement. I mean, even people who are not involved at all, there's something that's important to them. And I think if we keep that in mind, there's always more people that we can reach and educate on these base principles.
It just exemplifies that in every single human being, whether they're socialist, communist, there's a yearning for freedom and for the ability to say, you can't tell me what to do in some way, shape, or form. So
unless you're Paul Ryan, and then he says you can tell me what to do because I want to tell everybody else what to do.
You're going to be at Liberty Fest, correct? Yeah.
I'm sleeping on Danny Panzella's couch.
Awesome.
Can I raise my hand to speak? Hello.
Go for it, Gigi.
It's hard to get a word in edgewise with you too. You know that?
It didn't look
I wanted to ask you. No, you go from one to the other and you can't speak, Anyway, I just wanted to ask you, in 2010, most of my Liberty candidates had signed the 10th Amendment pledge. And, I don't see that happening this year. I think that 2 people signed it. I don't know if you've kept up with that. But that was a big thing because I wanted to make sure that, they were aware of nullification, and we're going to have to make it a question on our application for 2013. But have you stopped doing that, or because I wasn't sure? I think Peter Richter might have signed it.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think a good percentage of the people who signed. So the 10th Amendment pledge was basically, it was 10 principles, 10 core beliefs, 10 promises for the 2010 elections, and we made it available to local candidates, national candidates, and for those of you listening, Gigi was tireless in making sure that the Liberty candidates, it's libertycandidates.com, right? Is that right, Gigi?
Right, right.
So
Yes.
tons of these candidates are signed up saying, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Government, rights don't come from government. This is like an example of the core beliefs, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the federal government follows the Constitution, including supporting nullification bills. This took a lot of resources. And we made the decision after 2010 that although we have the pledge available, it still exists. We just don't have the resources, and because our prime focus is more on grassroots activism and resistance, we don't have the ability to support doing any election work. So, but we make it available. Maybe we should, I don't know, maybe we should pull it down. I don't know. I think it's good educationally for people who want to take it and run with it, but I just wish we had another 2 or 3 team members that could just run that.
Yeah, I understand.
I appreciate
We
you.
all do this, we don't make money doing what we do, which is, something that a lot of people don't realize. I mean, we spend so much of our time, fighting for liberty in every way we can. Unfortunately, we're not independently wealthy, so we can do it, 24 hours a day.
Well, we are, I mean, I know I grew up a communist, but I am a capitalist pig through and through. And we do believe that it's essential for liberty activists to earn an income being active for liberty. And that's why we do have a small paid staff, because there are people that, man, if we had more money, we would hire more people. And that's not a pitch to like start giving 10th Amendment Center money, because that's gross, and that's not something I like doing. But we do believe that the more that people start focusing their donations away from candidates and towards organizations that can hire non-Jesse Bentons, that we're going to see more and more people not having to work some dumb job to pay the food bills, but they can actually work towards liberty. I mean, if there was like a Cato Institute, but for good stuff, that would be awesome. I mean, I don't know if you can get that kind of funding, but these are the types of things that need to happen. That's our long-term goal, is to reach that.
Oh, what happened to Michael? I was going to ask him a question. I just was so excited to talk to him. The cat is beautiful.
She's a pain in the ass. That's what she is. God.
I want him to tell oh, here he is. He's coming back. I want him to tell everybody how he was raised a communist.
Oh, like Obama.
Yeah, but he didn't change much. This guy's a libertarian now.
Well, anyway, is he coming back?
Yeah, I saw him in the room again. So I'm sure he'll be up here again, unless he just doesn't like us and he's decided there's not enough cannolis available.
I missed the whole cannoli thing, so I'm not getting that. But you're making me hungry. Oh, cat finally went.
Okay, so Gigi, when I was there for the TSA event, was that last year?
Yeah, Dan the Scan.
Yes. So after that, I went out with a few people, and we ended up. I'm Italian, so in LA we don't have much Italian food that's worth writing home about. I grew up in Milwaukee, so I spent a lot of time eating Chicago Italian food. And so one of the number one goals every time on the East Coast is to get a good cannoli, and where else is a good place for that but New York? So that's, I think, New York. I think you guys, I think cannoli.
Everybody is asking you How were you raised a communist? Where were you? In Minnesota, being raised a communist? Like, how did that happen?
I grew up in Wisconsin, and people think of lefties in New York and California. These are fake lefties, like the limousine or the Porsche lefties. The real hardcore left-wingers are in the Farm Belt. So, for example, in Minnesota, they don't have a Democrat Party and a Republican Party. They have the Republicans and the DFL, the Democratic Farm Labor Party. So, I mean, this is like old-school lefties. In Milwaukee, we had an avowed, so we didn't vote for R versus D. The vote was for mayor, for example, was R versus S. The mayor was an avowed socialist for many years. So these old Midwest towns, the farming belt like that has a lot of very, very serious, like Maoist-style progressives. And I wasn't necessarily raised like, you are going to be a communist. My old-fashioned Catholic parents hated communism. That's evil. But they certainly taught me that, and I learned in the schools, I certainly was taught that there was a government solution to every problem. So as I grew older, I gravitated towards communism. I read a lot of Marx. I mean, I understand where they're coming from. I just know that all their solutions are evil. But that's the story.
That's wonderful. I'm going to let you go because you've given us way more time than you had originally wanted to, and I so appreciate it. And I'm sorry I talked too much and didn't let Gigi talk. Now I'm all embarrassed about it, but we will definitely get together at Liberty Fest. I'm going to be singing, and we'll get together and chat, and people are going to have questions. And thank you so much for giving me some time.
Awesome. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thanks. I'll see you soon.
See you in October.